The night everything started was supposed to be a celebration. Dorcas drove her 14-year-old daughter Sandra straight from soccer practice to a crowded dinner at her parents' house. Blue and gold balloons hung from the ceiling while foil trays of food filled the long dining table. "Looks like we walked into someone else's party," Dorcas whispered as they slipped into 2 empty chairs. Sandra gave a polite smile and clapped when everyone clapped, even though the giant glitter poster on the wall carried only one name. It said Alex's future, and the room treated him like the star of the evening. Dorcas watched quietly as her sister Megan directed the night like a stage manager. She positioned her son Alex at the center of every photo while gently pushing Sandra a few steps behind him. "Sweetheart, stand there so Alex stays in front," Megan said with a practiced smile. Sandra obeyed without protest because she had already learned how things worked in this family. Dorcas reached under the table and squeezed her daughter's knee. "You okay?" she whispered softly. Sandra nodded and kept smiling while Alex proudly waved his college acceptance letter in the air. After dinner, Dorcas's mother Flora tapped her spoon against a glass to quiet the room. "Everyone knows how hard Alex has worked," she announced proudly while George nodded beside her. Megan pressed her hands to her chest like she was already celebrating victory. Flora lifted her chin and smiled at Alex. "Your grandfather and I have decided to help you with college," she continued warmly. The room burst into applause as Alex blinked in surprise and then grinned widely, soaking in the attention like sunlight. Dorcas clapped along with everyone else, but something felt wrong deep inside her chest. Her parents were comfortable, but they had never had that kind of money just sitting around. "College is expensive," George added proudly. "But it's important to invest in the child who's ready." The words landed sharply in Dorcas's ears, especially when Sandra clapped politely beside her. Sandra leaned slightly toward her mother and whispered, "Mom, are they really paying for everything?" Dorcas forced a calm smile. "We'll talk later," she murmured. While everyone surrounded Alex with hugs and congratulations, Dorcas quietly stepped into the hallway. She pulled out her phone and opened the college account she and her husband Darius had built for Sandra over many careful years. "Just checking," she whispered to herself while the screen loaded. The number appeared and Dorcas froze where she stood. The balance didn't show a smaller amount or a recent withdrawal. It showed $0, and beneath it was a single transfer record that made her stomach drop. $73,000 had been moved out 3 days earlier. Dorcas stared at the screen for a long second, convinced it had to be some kind of mistake. She refreshed the page once, then again, hoping the number would change. It didn't. The history line stayed there like a quiet accusation. "Transfer out, $73,000. Memo. Gift." Dorcas felt the air leave her lungs slowly. In the dining room, people were still cheering and laughing for Alex. She slipped the phone back into her pocket and counted to 3, forcing her face into calm before walking back toward the noise. Sandra looked up immediately when Dorcas returned to the table. "Mom," she whispered, searching her mother's face carefully. Dorcas placed a steady hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Bathroom break," she said softly. Sandra nodded but didn't look convinced. Across the table, Flora laughed loudly while Megan talked about Alex's future like it had already been written in gold. George poured more sparkling cider and lifted his glass again. No one looked nervous. No one looked guilty. They looked relieved, and that made Dorcas's stomach twist even tighter. Dorcas didn't sit down this time. Instead, she walked straight into the kitchen where Flora was slicing cake. George stood nearby stacking plates while Megan's voice floated in from the dining room. Dorcas pulled her phone out and held it between them. "I'll ask once," she said quietly. "Did either of you move money from Sandra's college account?" Flora blinked slowly like the question annoyed her. George's jaw tightened. "Not right now, Dorcas," Flora said sharply. "You're misunderstanding something." Dorcas didn't move. $73,000, she said calmly. "Transferred 3 days ago. Memo says gift." George leaned closer and lowered his voice. "This is family business," he murmured. "Alex needs help and you and Darius are doing fine." Dorcas waited for one of them to say it was a mistake. Instead, Flora straightened her shoulders. "We didn't steal anything," she said coldly. "Watch your words in my house." Then she picked up the cake knife and walked back into the dining room smiling like nothing had happened. Dorcas returned to the table beside Sandra and picked up her fork as if the conversation had never happened. Sandra leaned closer and whispered, "Did I do something wrong?" The question hit harder than the empty account. Dorcas wrapped an arm around her chair and shook her head gently. "No, sweetheart," she said quietly. Across the table, Megan was already talking about dorm rooms and tuition deposits while Alex soaked up more applause. Dorcas listened to them plan a future that had been paid for with her daughter's money. And that was the moment she stopped being the quiet one in the family. Dorcas and Sandra left the party earlier than everyone expected. Flora barely looked up when they said goodbye, and Megan waved casually while still talking about Alex's college plans. The drive home was quiet except for the soft hum of the car engine. Sandra stared out the window with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Finally, she spoke in a small voice. "Mom, is the money gone?" Dorcas kept her eyes on the road and answered honestly. "Yes," she said. "But that doesn't mean we're losing it forever." When they got home, Dorcas opened her laptop at the kitchen counter while Sandra stood nearby watching quietly. She logged into the account again and took screenshots of everything she saw. The balance showing 0. The transfer record. The memo labeled gift. Sandra leaned closer and whispered, "Why would Grandma and Grandpa do that?" Dorcas paused before answering. "Because they thought they could," she said calmly. Then she saved every file in a new folder labeled Sandra 529 Evidence. A few minutes later, Dorcas's phone rang. It was her husband, Darius, calling during his break at work. Dorcas told him everything in steady detail from the dinner announcement to the empty account. Darius didn't interrupt or question her once. When she finished, he simply asked, "What do you need me to do?" Dorcas exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle into something clear and focused. "For now," she said, "I just need you on our side." Darius asked to speak to Sandra next. Dorcas handed her the phone and stepped aside while Sandra listened quietly. "Hey kiddo," Darius said gently through the speaker. "None of this is your fault, okay?" Sandra nodded even though he couldn't see her. "I know," she said softly. "Good," Darius replied. "Because your mom and I saved that money for you and we're going to make sure it comes back where it belongs." Sandra handed the phone back with a small but determined expression. The next morning, Dorcas woke up early and started building a record. She wrote down everything she remembered from the dinner while the details were still fresh in her mind. The applause, the announcement, the exact moment she saw the account balance. Then she printed the screenshots and placed them neatly in a folder. Dorcas didn't shout and she didn't call her parents to argue. Instead, she picked up her car keys and drove toward the local police station. Because this was no longer a family disagreement. It was theft. The police station was quiet that morning, the kind of quiet that made Dorcas feel strangely steady as she walked inside. A woman at the front desk looked up and greeted her calmly. "How can we help you today?" she asked. Dorcas placed the folder on the counter and took a breath. "I need to report an unauthorized transfer from my daughter's college account," she explained. The officer nodded and motioned for her to sit while she pulled up a report form on her tablet. The officer introduced herself as Officer Leah and began asking careful questions. "What type of account was it?" she asked while typing. "A 529 college fund for my daughter Sandra," Dorcas replied. Leah nodded and continued. "How much was transferred?" Dorcas slid the printed screenshot across the desk. $73,000, she answered quietly. Leah's eyebrows lifted slightly as she studied the document. "And you did not authorize this transfer?" she asked. Dorcas shook her head firmly. "No, I did not." Dorcas explained the dinner, the sudden announcement about Alex's tuition, and the moment she checked the account. Leah listened carefully without interrupting. "Do you believe someone in your family accessed the account?" Leah asked. Dorcas hesitated for a moment before answering honestly. "Yes," she said. "The only time I ever logged into that account outside my home was on my parents' computer when they offered to contribute." Leah typed the information and nodded slowly. "That detail is important," she said. When the report was finished, Leah printed a copy and circled the incident number with a pen. "This is your case reference," she explained. "Financial crimes detectives will review the report and follow up." Dorcas took the paper and looked at the simple black number printed at the top. It didn't feel dramatic or emotional. It just felt official. "Keep every message they send you," Leah added. "Texts, emails, anything. Don't delete a single thing." Dorcas stepped outside the station and sat in her car for a moment before starting the engine. She texted Darius the case number and took a steady breath. The next call she made was to the brokerage company that held Sandra's college account. After navigating the automated menu, a representative answered the line. "Thank you for calling. My name is Dana. How can I help you today?" Dorcas gripped the phone and said clearly, "I need to report a fraudulent transfer." Dana listened carefully while Dorcas explained what had happened. Dorcas read the transaction details directly from her screen, including the amount, the date, and the memo labeled gift. Dana's tone stayed professional as she asked a few precise questions. "Have you ever shared access to the account or logged in from another device?" she asked. Dorcas nodded even though Dana couldn't see her. "Once," she said. "At my parents' house. They insisted on contributing to the account and had me log in on their desktop computer." Dana paused for a moment before responding. "Okay," she said. "We're going to open a fraud investigation on this transfer." Dorcas listened carefully while Dana explained the next steps. The company would review login history, device activity, and the internet location connected to the transfer. "You should change your password immediately and remove all trusted devices you don't control," Dana advised. Dorcas grabbed a pen and wrote everything down. "If the transfer can be reversed, we will attempt that," Dana added. Dorcas thanked her and ended the call, then sat in the driveway for a moment before going inside. Sandra was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework like it was any normal afternoon. Dorcas leaned down and kissed the top of her daughter's head. "Everything okay?" Sandra asked quietly. Dorcas nodded. "Yes," she said. "We're just making sure the right people know what happened." Sandra didn't ask another question, but the way she sat up straighter told Dorcas she understood. That evening, Dorcas sat beside Darius at the kitchen counter while they secured every account tied to their family. She changed passwords, turned on two-factor authentication, and removed every device that wasn't her own. Darius watched quietly while she worked. "You're handling this the right way," he said finally. Dorcas didn't answer right away. Instead, she finished the last security step and closed the laptop. "I'm done letting them rewrite the story," she replied. 2 days later, Dana called with the first update from the investigation. "The transfer has been flagged," she explained. "The receiving account has been placed under a temporary hold while we review the transaction." Dorcas leaned against the kitchen counter as she listened. "The memo says gift," Dana continued. "But our process requires proof of authorization." Dorcas nodded slowly. "They don't have that," she said. Later that afternoon, Dorcas received another call from a number she didn't recognize. "Hello, this is Detective Marcus from Financial Crimes," the voice said calmly. Dorcas stepped into the hallway so Sandra wouldn't hear the conversation. Marcus asked her several questions about the account, the transfer date, and whether she had ever logged in from her parents' house. Dorcas told him about the kitchen table login months earlier. Marcus paused thoughtfully. "That helps establish how they gained access," he said. Marcus then asked where Dorcas had been at the exact time the transfer happened. Dorcas didn't hesitate. "I was at work," she replied. She explained that the medical billing office where she worked required employees to badge in each morning. "I can send my time records," she added. Marcus responded immediately. "Yes, please do. That will help confirm you weren't the one initiating the transfer." After the call ended, Dorcas printed her work records and emailed them along with her written timeline of the dinner. She described everything clearly: the announcement, the empty account, and the conversation in the kitchen. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair and read through the document once more. Every detail lined up with the timeline. For the first time since the dinner, Dorcas felt something close to calm. Later that evening, her phone lit up with a text from Flora. "Stop this immediately," it read. A second message followed from George. "You're tearing the family apart over paperwork." Then Megan sent one too. "How dare you punish my son for this?" Dorcas stared at the screen for a moment before taking screenshots of every message. She saved them in the same evidence folder and placed the phone face down on the table. Dorcas didn't respond to any of them. Instead, she forwarded the messages to Detective Marcus along with a short note explaining that her family was claiming the transfer had been a gift. A few minutes later, Sandra appeared in the doorway. "They're blaming you, aren't they?" she asked quietly. Dorcas looked at her daughter and nodded once. They're trying to, she said calmly. Then she closed the laptop and added one more sentence. But the truth doesn't need arguing. It just needs proof. 10 days after Dorcas filed the report, Dana from the brokerage company called again. We reviewed the access logs, she explained. Dorcas held the phone tightly while she listened. The transfer was initiated from a device and internet location that does not match your normal login activity. Dorcas stayed quiet as Dana continued. The IP address traces back to the neighborhood where your parents live. The confirmation didn't surprise Dorcas anymore. It simply made the story clearer. Later that afternoon, Detective Marcus called with another update. His voice stayed calm and professional. Your work records confirm you were at your office when the transfer occurred, he said. Dorcas leaned against the kitchen counter while Sandra worked at the table nearby. So I couldn't have done it, Dorcas replied. Correct, Marcus answered. Your alibi holds. The investigation is now focusing on the device that initiated the transfer. That evening, Dorcas and Sandra were packing lunch for the next school day when the doorbell rang loudly. Dorcas checked the camera and saw Flora, George, and Megan standing on the porch. Their faces looked tense and impatient. Dorcas opened the door only a few inches with the safety chain still locked. What is this? George demanded immediately. Flora folded her arms. You called the police on your own parents, she said sharply. Dorcas kept her voice calm. I reported an unauthorized transfer, she replied. Megan stepped forward angrily. The bank put a hold on the account the money went into, she said. Alex's tuition payment got blocked. Dorcas finally understood why they had come. Not to apologize. To regain control of the situation. George pointed toward the door. Open this and stop making a scene, he snapped. Behind Dorcas, Sandra slowly stepped into the hallway. Flora didn't even glance toward her granddaughter. Alex needs that money now, she insisted. Sandra won't even use it for years. Megan rolled her eyes and added, Your daughter will be fine. Sandra's voice suddenly broke the silence behind Dorcas. Why did you take mine? She asked quietly. Megan answered immediately. Because you're a spoiled brat, she said without hesitation. Flora nodded and added coldly, Your cousin deserved it more. Dorcas felt Sandra stiffen behind her. For a moment the old version of Dorcas might have tried to smooth things over. But that version of her was gone. Dorcas stepped forward and closed the door firmly until the chain pulled tight. This conversation is over, she said calmly. George tried to punch the old garage code into the keypad, but it flashed red. Dorcas had already changed it days earlier. Flora stared at the door like it had betrayed her. Dorcas spoke one last time through the narrow gap. Return the $73,000, she said evenly. Or the process already started will continue. Then she shut the door completely and locked it. 6 months later, Dorcas logged into the account again while Sandra sat beside her at the kitchen table. The balance appeared on the screen and Sandra's eyes widened. It's back, she whispered. Dorcas nodded slowly. The full $73,000 had been restored through court-ordered restitution. Her parents had been forced to repay the money after the investigation proved the transfer came from their home computer. Word spread quickly through the extended family. Flora and George had already used part of the money to help Alex start college, so paying it back meant selling investments and taking a loan against their house. Alex had to adjust his plans and get a part-time job. For the first time in years, the family story didn't revolve around excuses. It revolved around consequences. Dorcas never contacted them again. The silence in her house felt peaceful instead of tense. Sandra began talking about art schools and future plans with confidence again. One evening, Sandra asked softly, Mom, were you scared to report them? Dorcas smiled and squeezed her hand. A little, she admitted. But protecting you matters more than protecting anyone's pride. And in that quiet kitchen, Dorcas knew she had finally broken the old family rule. This time she didn't adjust. She chose her daughter.